Okay, so what we're going to do today is talk about some vocabulary, and we're going to talk about types of sampling. All right, the first thing it leads us off with is defining population. A population is the entire group of people or objects that you want information about. Now, a lot of times it's not possible to get information on an entire population, which is where statistics comes in. But population just means the entire group of people or objects that you want information about. So it's often unreasonable or impossible to conduct a census on every member of the population. How often do we have a census, guys?
Often. 5 years. 10 years.
Every 10 years.
Someone else said that.
Oh, okay. Well, Natalie was correct. Now, do you think that when we have a census of all those living in the United States, that every single person living in the United States is accounted for? No. But
N minus 1. N minus 1.
Because some people aren't legally living here.
some people don't want to be found. That is true. That is true. And so even though the Census Bureau hires people and they come knock on doors and try to get information, it's very difficult to get information on an entire population. So a census is a survey of an entire population. It is very costly and time-consuming. So if we use appropriate sampling techniques, a sample can be used to make predictions about a population when a census is impractical. Now, if I wanted to survey my students about something, I could survey my entire population, couldn't I?
Yeah.
I see all of you during the day. I could ask the same question to each class, and I could have information on the entire population. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you can't. When we take information from a sample and we make predictions about that, that process is called inference. We're inferring something from a small sample onto the whole group. Are we good with the vocab so far? So, a sample is just a subset of a population. So we would choose some from the entire population, and that would be our sample. A subset should be unbiased and representative of every member of the population. So we have to be very careful how we set up our surveys to make sure that we have an unbiased and representative sample of our population. When every member of our population has an equal chance of being chosen, the sample is called a random sample. So the key word here, equal chance of being chosen. Sometimes it's called a probability sample, and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as not just a random sample, but a simple random sample. Random samples are most likely to be representative of the population and are preferred over non-random samples. We're going to look at the types of sampling, but one of the non-random is a convenience sample. That's where you just, let's say I ask you to survey students your own age, and you sat right where you were and asked the 4 people around you. That would be a convenience sample. Or a self-selected, where participants must choose whether they participate in the survey. Have any of you ever been to Chick-fil-A and gotten the receipt, and at the bottom it says you can go online and take this survey and you can get a free chicken sandwich?
Twice in a row.
Twice in a row? Lucky you.
1 in a million and a half.
All right. Well, you got to decide whether or not to participate in that survey, didn't you?
Like, I did it the first time, and I went back to get my free chicken sandwich, and then I got it again.
Impossible.
I don't think I've
Let's figure out the probability of that.
Ooh.
1 out of 15.
You know,
As fun as that would be.
because that happens with somewhat regularity at the Chick-fil-A, I'm very curious as to their method of choosing, and we'll talk about that when we get to the different types of samples.
Look at my receipts.
So we're going to talk about the non-random methods for surveying in just a minute. Yes, ma'am.
So for the random sample, would that be like, you know when McDonald's had their thing where they would just pay for your meal? Would that be that?
Oh, like if you smile at them? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I never smile at them.
That's the thing. I'll
They
smile.
never gave. Actually,
It was
I
like
never
for
go
a
to
month.
McDonald's.
What's the thing? I hate McDonald's.
Like for a month, if you went there,
They would do kindness ones. I remember that.
yeah, it'd be like your total.
I don't know that that was very random. We're going to talk about what randomness means in a statistic situation versus, like, sometimes I say, okay, I'm going to randomly call on somebody, and I go like this.
Jake.
It is Elena.
It's never someone
Okay.
at the top. It's always
Yeah.
the bottom.
You go.
That's why it's the best to have
Tafumi.
at the top.
See, it's still in the middle to the bottom.
No, she's up there. She's second. All right.
Because it always is.
So, that is not what we're talking about when we talk about random. Now, a bias sample is a sample that is not representative of the population. So, in a bias sample, we may have some underrepresentation, where one or more parts of the population are completely left out, or we might have overrepresentation, where greater emphasis is placed on one or more parts of the population when choosing. Now, after we do this, we're going to talk about some surveys and information that you guys have filled out. I want you to decide if it was for the entire population, if it was a sample. If it was a sample, what type of sample? All right. When determining if a sample may be biased or representative, ask yourself the following questions. What is the population of interest? So, if we want to know the college plans of seniors at Stars Mill, our population should be seniors at Stars Mill. Was a sample created in such a way that every member of the population had an equal likelihood of being selected? Because that gives us a random selection process. So, was a random selection process used, such as every 10th senior selected from a class roster starting at a random location?
No, that's not
Yes,
fair.
That's random.
That would be random.
But what if you don't like the 10th person?
Then they wouldn't ask
Unless
you.
they count the 9th person and they're like, oh, let me get back in line.
It's random.
All right.
And they would
So
not.
it's
Were any members of the population automatically left out due to the survey process? So, if they used the school directory to select their participants, those who chose not to send in their information would be underrepresented.
What about those not going to?
College.
Yeah,
That would that count too?
that could be an underrepresented part of the population. All right, were any members of the population more likely to participate in the survey than others? So, if the researcher did the surveying at a Georgia Tech informational meeting,
That would be
That would be unfair.
That
That'd
would
be
be
biased.
good.
that would add some bias, wouldn't it? Yes.
Obviously, all those kids want to go to UGA, right?
Right, or else they wouldn't have wasted their time going to the informational session.
Thanks for
Unless
having
they
me.
had donuts or something.
That's
That's so true though.
But Caroline said unless they had donuts or something. Okay. All right. So here's the big dealie. A statistic. So we're doing data analysis. We are studying statistics. A statistic is a number that describes a sample.
Sample.
A parameter is a number that describes the population. So, statistic sample, SS, statistic sample, parameter population, PP.
Maybe.
Alright, so if a random selection process is used that produces a representative sample, sample statistics may be used to estimate population parameters. So if we performed a good process on collecting our statistics, then that information from our statistics can be used to estimate the entire population. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it.
What if you just do it with like 5 people?
We're going to talk about why 5 is too small of a number.
That's what I thought.
Okay? Our sample size would at least need to be 30
At least.
in 30 or greater to eliminate a good bit of bias.
Okay.
Okay. So, in a survey of 40 employees at a company, 18 said they were unhappy with their pay. The company has 180 employees. Predict the number of employees that would be unhappy with their pay. So this is taking a sample statistic and applying it to the entire population. So how would you do that?
Parameter.
So you would multiply.
There'd be 81 people unhappy with their pay. You
Dang.
divide
Divided
18
by
by 40 and
18
then multiply that by
divided by
180.
And
Good!
then multiply that by 180.
I like it. 18 over 40 times 180. Now, that would mean that we would have 81 people that were unhappy with their pay. Now, there's a lot. I know I had to sit down here because the Moby's not working, but there's a lot of extra going on. Good. All right. Now, it didn't tell us how this information was collected. We don't know what kind of sample this is. What if they had taken on your exit survey, you're quitting a job, and they ask you if one of the reasons why you were quitting was your pay? Now, that would be biased, wouldn't
Because you're
it?
quitting.
So,
Obviously,
if we had the bias survey, then obviously we
everyone
wouldn't
would be unhappy.
use that to estimate. That would not be used to estimate population parameter. Okay, so here's the words we've been using. Survey, just a study of one or more of the characteristics in a group. Population, the entire group. Sample, part of that group. Random sample, every member, equal chance. A representative sample is a sample that accurately reflects the population. So those ratios of the entire population to the ratio of the makeup in the sample would be the same. A biased sample is one that does not accurately reflect the population. And sometimes, even if we do all this right, if we write biased questions, a biased question is a question that encourages a particular response. Now, at the end of the last year, the state sent me a survey on some of the things that were changing and some of the things we were doing, and quite a few of the questions were biased.
Like,
They only had positive choices for the answers. Now, I may have agreed that one of the positive choices was correct, but whether or not I agreed with that didn't matter. I read the question and thought, biased question. It is leading me to only a positive answer. So whether or not I agreed, I could look at that survey and throw out the results because I didn't have a choice, you know?
So it was like okay, good, and great, like that.
Yes,
So they give
So
you any
like-
bad option.
correct. Yes.
would a biased question be like if it was like cookies or brownies? But what
Well,
if you
if
didn't
you
like
said
either?
delicious cookies or
No, that's
plain
not
brownies,
biased.
then that would be a biased question.
But
That's
it's like you could
yes.
only say cookies
Delicious
and brownies,
chocolate
but you couldn't say anything
hot out
else.
the oven
It's
cookies versus
That's a good question. though.
Yeah.
old day old brownies left in the sun.
Actually, the way he worded it is perfect.
Love me some day old brownies.
He made the cookies sound way more appealing than the brownies.
See? I'm just
And all of a sudden I'm hungry.
Well,
You're welcome.
Okay.
brownies.
All right, so you guys may have talked about some of these sampling methods before in previous classes, but the random sample I told you is also known as a simple random sample. That's where members are chosen using a method that gives everyone an equally likely chance of being selected. Our calculators have a random number generator.
Yeah.
So if I went and looked at your calculator numbers and then set up my random number generator to go from there to there and just hit enter, and it popped out a number, and I chose 5 of you that way, then that would be a simple random sample of the students in my class. A stratified random sample. This is where our population is divided into groups, and then members are selected from each group. So if we're thinking high school, you guys are already separated into freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. So if I pulled some from each group, that would be considered a stratified random sample. A cluster sample is when a whole group is taken as a sample. So the examples we have here is if a flight lands at the airport and you interview everyone on that one plane. And that's how you chose to sample. Or, as the school did this year, on the teacher surveys, they chose to survey just my 3rd period class. And that was it. So on the teacher survey, that was for my teacher evaluation, it was just my 3rd period class. No other students that I teach all day long. A systematic sample, that's where a rule or a pattern is used to select members of a population. And Matt, this is what I'm wondering if they do at Chick-fil-A. Is it systematic? Is there a rule like every 50th customer gets one? A coupon? Or is it triggered by something we order? I don't think it's triggered by something we order. Because I order the same thing pretty much every time I go to Chick-fil-A. My kids don't really waver in their orders. And sometimes we get them and sometimes we don't. But that would be interesting to see how they're choosing. There's probably some rule that they're using, but I'm not sure what it is. Convenient sample. Only members who are easily accessible are chosen. So that's like if you just interview the people around you.
It's going to be skewed.
Self-selected, that's once again where you, or also known as voluntary response, members volunteer for the survey. So you receive an email asking you to answer a few questions on a topic, and you can choose to answer them or not. Like every time I call in to customer service, it'll say, would you be willing to take a brief survey at the end of this call?
No.
Every time you go to like Dick's Sporting Goods, they always ask.
Oh, they do, yeah.
I always press yes, because I wonder if the person I'm working with knows that I'm going to take a survey at the end, and maybe they'll be more kind.
Or maybe they'll give you a discount.
So,
It's like illegal.
Or
so anyway, let's talk about that survey that they did for the teachers. Did they choose the best possible way of surveying our students?
No.
No. If you think about the classes I teach support, I teach accelerated analytic geometry, and I teach accelerated coordinate algebra. Did they have a good representative sample of all populations that I teach? My 3rd period is accelerated analytic geometry. No, they didn't. So the people similar to you were represented, but none of the accelerated coordinate algebra were represented, and none of my support kids were represented. So I had 2 out of 3 of the populations that I teach that were not represented at all.
Not fair.
So it wasn't quite set up the way it should be. And also when you do a sample, for the sample to be a representative sample, the number in the sample should be at least 30. I do not have 30 students in my 3rd period. So, we missed the mark on several ways for that to be a true representative sample. So even though they took the sampling statistics and they actually applied it as a population parameter, it didn't meet the qualifications for that. So it really shouldn't have. That data actually isn't valid.
You'd think the people who are in charge of things like statistics would actually
They would know
those
that.
skills.
I know that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but
Yes.
Yeah, but it's
Which
just,
is-
Then we get
I think it's just like
politics
easier
and
to
like-
say.
Yeah.
I know. A lot of stuff we choose. A lot of things are chosen for convenience. But when you're doing a true survey, you would not want to do it that way. Okay. the last thing, the most accurate would be a census. Very accurate would be a simple random sample. And after that, stratified would be next, and cluster would be
Like third
next.
best, kind of.
Ones that are not very accurate at all would be a convenient sample and a self-selected sample. Now, with the self-selected sample, usually somebody is just overly excited
So it's good.
and you get something awesome, or they're completely irritated and you get something terrible. Most of the just average aren't going to self-select unless there's a reward like a free chicken sandwich.
See, that's what I was talking about.
That might change your
I
mind.
think it did
Okay.
good.
Would that make it accurate or would that still make it not very accurate?
For sure.